you when we're good to go. James, 1 second. Chat over there, just chatting back and forth. We're live. I'll tell you when we're good to go. James, 1 second.
We're good, Luke?
Yep, we're good to go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Hired Summit. My name is James Jackson III, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Who I have with me today is some great individuals to take part in discussion on how to be a better ally. And who I have with me is Jen Tardy, Ross Romero, and Francis Cornell. And before I like to get started, just wanted to have each of you just kind of introduce your background and your experience in diversity and inclusion, so people are familiar with who you guys are, and then we'll go and get the discussion going. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Jen.
Well, I am so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Jen Tardy. I am the owner of Jennifer Tardy Consulting, and I've been in this world of HR and recruiting for the last 15 years. But through my business, we do two things. One, we coach job seekers and we tailor it to their experience to help them to navigate the bias that's baked into the hiring system. And then the second thing that we do is we help employers to implement effective diversity recruiting programs. So I'm excited to talk all things recruiting and job search.
Awesome, great. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it, and we look forward to having your input. Next, we'll go over to Francis.
Hey everyone, excited to be here. I'm Francis Cornell. I'm currently an executive director for Advocacy, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that serves the largest community of Latinx professionals in the tech industry. And outside of that role, I'm also a software engineer at Slack working on the web team. As a disclaimer, I have my dog Benji here with me. You may not see him, he's a mini dachshund. He was a little scared from the thunderstorms earlier, so I'm holding him with me now. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome, great. Well, while you're experiencing thunderstorms and have Hawaii in your background, we have desert heat over here in Salt Lake City where Ross and I are located. About to get to a 90-something degrees here of this hot heat. So we appreciate some thunderstorms here in the near future, right, Ross? We'll go to you, introduce yourself.
Absolutely, we do need the water. So Ross Romero is my name. I've had the chance to work in employment law actually for a number of years with a law firm. I now have my own business called Inclusion Strategies, and the work I do centers around kind of government relations work and diversity and inclusion, and had a chance to serve in the Utah legislature. So I have a lot of contacts around the nation in national Latino organizations, and so obviously that's a big emphasis in some of the work I do and the advocacy I bring. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for introducing yourself. I'm excited to go and get this panel discussion started on how to be a better ally. And we heard about ally when when people were referring to the LGBTQ community. That's when I first heard about the term ally. And now with the social justice movement, we're hearing it more and more about how to be an ally, not only to the LGBTQ community, but also to the BIPOC community as well. And so people have always asked, how to be an ally. People are wondering what an ally is. So let's just start with the basics. And what is an ally? So who would like to go and start off and answering that question?
So I don't mind kicking things off. So when I think of an ally, I think of what can I do, to keep this message, to keep what's important to this specific community. What can I do to keep this message moving forward, to keep a platform for it? And so a part of being an ally is understanding what's affecting specific communities and understanding what they believe is a priority. And so what can I do in support of this community to keep that message front and central?
Awesome. Great definition. Francis or Ross, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So to me, I think an ally is just essentially just a member who doesn't identify the same as you, but is willing to go out and support you. So I don't identify as trans, but I support trans rights is like a very clear example.
Okay. And Ross, you had some input as well on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's really understanding others first and foremost, and then being an advocate for where they are and their issues. So, you know, not sharing certain backgrounds of others doesn't mean that you can't be supportive of the struggle and of the mission and of the work that is being done.
Great. Jen and Ross, you guys talked about understanding. Ross, I'll go to you for this question. How does one begin to understand? Because people ask, like, where do I start? I'm just trying to be a better ally. You know, how do I begin to understand? So what would you recommend to someone who wants to be an ally? What does that look like for them? How should they start?
Well, as you know, James, I'm quite involved in chambers of commerce, and as an example, I'm a member of the Utah Black Chamber of Commerce, wanting to understand what is going on in the Black community, wanting to help promote, you know, opportunities, economic opportunities for all communities. And then, of course, I've been on the board of the Utah Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So it's really, I would say, finding places to connect, to show earnest interest in advancing others and opportunities. And so that's, you know, one of the ways that I've been able to learn from others, other organizations. And I'll just say, finally, in Utah, we also tend to work very collaboratively. We have the Utah Minority Bar Association, not each specific ethnic group's bar. And so we have a chance to interact and talk and learn from each other. And I think that's also been very helpful.
Great. Yeah. Learning is key and connecting to the communities. Jen, do you have anything to add about what you meant by understanding?
Yeah, so for me, understanding is, I'm putting myself into sort of research mode, or less formal than that, just being curious, right? So I think some people make it way too serious in how can I learn more about this? I want to learn about this the right way, the most formal way, but you don't need to do all of that. Sometimes it's as simple as, let's do some searches in Google and let's find some white papers or some books that I can read, or I'm a huge proponent of podcasts or listening to guest speakers who are in that area too. So it's really about finding ways to educate yourself about the experiences of different groups, and so of the experiences and of you know, what those messages are that I was saying before too. Another great way of understanding or learning is immersing yourself in different communities too. And so it's not just about, you know, looking for someone to become your friend. It's volunteering in different causes, and that's a great immersive way of learning things as well too.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Francis, I saw you nodding your head. Was there something that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I feel like Jen just kind of, you know, I was huge +1 to everything you just said. Basically, education and community is what I was going to recommend in terms of, like, you know, trying to show up. Definitely, I feel like with the Black Lives Matter movement, we definitely saw a lot of that, like educational resources being shared across the board. And I'll share like a personal example with Tequeria. When we're doing partnership calls, a lot of folks don't actually understand the difference between like the term Latinx and Hispanic. And you should never assume anyone understands like a particular aspect of your culture. It's better to just go forth and, you know, tell folks what the difference is. In that like specific example. And then when it comes to community, exactly what Jen was talking about, I wouldn't try to force it, but instead like volunteering for causes, joining those communities and helping out, supporting by sharing resources. That's like an easy, low lift way to start out, I think.
Yeah. You know, education is key, you know, and I was grateful, you know, there's, you know, the popular media platforms like Hulu and Netflix started putting out like a Black channel, Black History channel, Black Lives Matter channel, and even like Apple Music did, for easy access for people to get educated. So once they get educated, now they're a little familiar with the community that they want to be allies for. And Jen, you mentioned about, using that voice, and Ross, you mentioned like being an advocate. What does that mean exactly, Jen?
Yeah, can I say one thing back to the other question, and then
Sure.
I'll come and answer this question too, because Francis, you just called it out, but I want to make sure, because it's a big deal what you're saying. It's having the right language to use. So you were talking about Latinx versus Hispanic. One of the first things that, especially through the boot camp that we do with recruiters who are trying to implement diversity recruiting programs, is we help them create a baseline of common language. Because if you don't know whether to use the word Hispanic or Latinx or African American versus Black, and you begin feeling really uncomfortable about, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to say something offensive? Am I going to, put the company at risk? You're not going to lean into those conversations. So it is so important to be able to have the right language to use to do this work as well. Okay, so then your next question, can you repeat that question again, please?
Yeah, well, real quick, because you definitely point out something very important, because so many people want to, some people want to be an ally, right? But, then they get educated, but yet some are still a little bit hesitant about being vocal because they are afraid of saying the wrong thing, or, they have maybe they're not so comfortable with what they learned and really how to say, use that language or use their voice to kind of share. So if they want to use their voice, that was going to be my question, how to use their voice. But what advice would you give someone that is hesitant on speaking up, right? Because they're not comfortable.
Yeah, so it's the part of finding out what is the gap that you see. So let's say, for instance, I want to engage in conversations around politics, but I don't really understand the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So it's being able to ask yourself, what do I need in order to engage in this conversation? It's the same thing around if you're trying to engage in conversations about what's affecting the Black community. What do I feel is the gap there, right? And I just did a keynote earlier where I was talking about where do I feel resistance, and being able to ask yourself that real question and answering where the resistance is felt. And so if you know that at minimum, you don't know, using that earlier example, whether to use the term African American or Black, start doing some research around that. And then find out what the most effective language is, because it's not about the right or the wrong language to use. It's like, what's most effective to use? And then once you have the right language to use that makes you feel comfortable, start leaning into conversations in baby steps. Maybe it's starting with, people that you're most, you feel safest around. Maybe it's engaging with posts that are out there on LinkedIn or other platforms because it feels safer to you, but it's taking baby steps into it. And then, you were asking for a second ago about, how are you a great ally when you hear somebody else that's actually saying something? The biggest way to be a great ally is amplifying other people's voices. And so I love when I put out posts like today is August 13th. It's Equal Pay Day for Black women. It takes 8 months into the new year to earn what a white man earns doing the same job in all of 2019. And so I put out a post today and 12 people have shared that post. That is being an ally. That's amplifying the message that I'm putting out there that I happen to find on equalpaytoday.org.
Awesome. That's great. I think what the key thing you said right there is start with the people you feel safest with, because when you have that strong connection and you feel safe with individuals around you, then maybe you can start asking the questions that you may feel uncomfortable still. You learn some material and you feel like you can go out and be that voice, be like, you need a little bit more clarification. And I think what's important is what you said is start with the safest people, because when you're safe, that means you have a strong connection, and it's so you feel okay maybe saying the wrong thing, because if you have that close connection with somebody, then they will correct you and help you navigate and be like, oh, okay, thank you. Because they know that your intention is to be a little more vocal, and you're just looking for some clarity. So yeah, starting with the people around you that are safe is perfect, and you can start expanding beyond that. So that's great. And you, a wonderful example about amplifying the voices, you know, sharing with the posts and social media. But let's say, for example, I don't feel like I have a good platform. You know, I'm either entry level here. I feel I just have an entry level position, or I'm not very engaged in the community, but I still want to help in some sort of way. So Ross, what would you recommend to someone who doesn't feel like they have a good platform to really make an impact?
Well, I think that, you know, what's happening in today's environment with social justice movement, this is everyone taking a little bit on themselves and standing up and being an ally to Black Lives Matter, right? Saying, hey, it's not okay with what's going on, particularly with African-American men and the criminal justice system. So I think people are kind of advocating their personal views. And not surprising, they're bringing those views to the workplace, and they are talking with others about what they did on the weekend. And if a social protest is part of their weekend experience, not surprising, you're going to have these conversations. Now, we're not as proximate in the workplace as we have been because of COVID, but we're still sharing this experience. We are still gathering to protest. And so I think that you know, every voice matters in the conversation, particularly around diversity and inclusion. And I think the final thing I'll say, it's really incumbent upon us that do the work to make sure to tell others they can't do it wrong. If you come to the conversation earnestly and you want to learn, we'll help you, right? That's our job, is to help guide these conversations and the partnerships that can be established. So you know, don't be afraid. There is no bad question. There is no wrong question. And let's navigate this together to help everyone's awareness rise a little bit.
Yeah, you know, that's great. You know, it does go both ways. If we want someone to be an ally, it is our responsibility to kind of help them navigate along the way. If we want them to amplify our voice, well, then we need to help them amplify the voice and share our experiences so they better understand. But leading into that, I think one of the most important questions that people in the back of their minds, like, I want to go out and help. And I think that's, you know, they have their own ideas in mind, their own purpose. But from your perspective here, Francis, why is it important to be an ally?
I can speak from the diversity in tech just because I have the most experience in that. And also I did kind of want to touch on the earlier question, because I feel strongly about this. I feel like an ally still has to take that initiative. It can't just be on us as people of color to like educate that person. I'm thinking about a friend that I have that I met online. It's this guy in Ohio, not a lot of Black, Latinx, or Indigenous people in his area. So he has to take that initiative to research online and understand kind of our struggles, because there's no one around him who he's going to be able to have that kind of honest conversation with. And thankfully I'm friends with him, so I can like talk with him about that. But, you know, for other folks, they still have to take that first step, right? So I think to that point, like there does have to be some initiative from that other party. But to the second point, why is it important? I think of like this long term, at least within the diversity, for diversity in tech issue. We all know, especially now with this pandemic, that tech is so fundamental to how we survive and live as a society. And for the most part, there is a huge lack of diversity in tech, and the numbers haven't budged for the past 10 years or so since I've been in the industry. And if we keep going along that line, it's going to get to the point where, to Ross's point about social justice and the criminal justice system, we're going to have machine learning algorithms and platforms in place that are biased. If we have the same people in the room, the same people making those decisions and creating those platforms. So if we don't diversify the folks who are creating these platforms for us that are serving us at scale, we're going to end up in like these dystopian, almost how it feels now, like scenarios more and more often. So that's why I think it's really important. It's just about, you know, long-term, how we want our society to be run and how we want it to be equitable for everybody, and have a level playing field, in my opinion.
Great. You know, that's a perfect answer, and appreciate you responding that way. And thank you for clarifying earlier about at least allies taking that initiative. I want to be sure that's important. You know, you have to take the initiative and go out there and do and be the ally. But if you need clarification, if you want some more guidance, if we want to help them amplify, then yeah, we want to be there for them to continue to push us and help our voices. What you said, Jen, is amplify it a lot larger. Jen, do you have anything else to add about, you know, why allyship is important?
Yes. So, but I want to answer it in a little different way.
Sure.
A lot of people have come to me and they've said, you know, hey, you know, what can I do to support, especially as we're talking about Black Lives Matter, you know, what can we do? And here's what I share with them. It's not just about what you can do personally, right? Because that could be anything and it can put a ton of pressure on you. What can I do as a human being? But I also want you to consider your role and ask the question, how can I use my role, my job title, my work function, and make a positive impact on this? So I talk to recruiters about this quite often because recruiters have access to one of the most powerful systems in the nation, the hiring system. And so when I talk about systems, you know, there's, you know, the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, so on and so forth. The hiring system is powerful because it can add to or take wealth, right? In your pockets and in your homes and in your communities. And so when I'm talking to recruiters, I'm saying, hey, there are so many things that you can do as a recruiter that can positively impact the hiring system so that more people have access to opportunities. And then when you have more access to opportunities, you have more access to wealth. And so being an ally is not just about you as a person, as a human, it's about how can I use my role to be an ally too. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, that's perfect. Matter of fact, I want to kind of dive deeper into that because we talked about earlier about the how and the why. But now let's talk about, you know, the outcomes. You know, what do we what because you know sometimes when we start wanting people to become an ally and they want to go out and use their voice, like we want some impact. We want to have some expectation. We want to see what outcomes and goals that we can reach out of that. So diving deeper here, Jen, what do we want to see out of this allyship happening in the workplace? What do we hope to achieve?
Yeah, so I think a part of it is accountability, right? So through allyship, you can help to have a bigger voice toward accountability. And when I'm talking about accountability, I'm talking about the whole notion of, you know, intent versus impact. A lot of people and companies have great intent, right? And they're like, oh, I'm a good person. And so as a good person, you shouldn't hold me accountable for the outcome. But allies and you know, people in marginalized or minoritized groups, we're saying, look at the outcomes, right? And when we're talking about corporations in particular, we're saying, look at your data. If you're saying that we have great intentions of building a great culture, but the data shows that people are leaving your organization, what are you going to do about the outcome? So that allyship helps to create a bigger voice toward accountability for people who are saying, you know, change is coming, but maybe not fast enough.
Yeah, I love that. Francis, you're nodding your head a little bit. Do you have anything to add about what other goals do we want to see as far as allyship?
Yeah, I think before that, I just want to plus one what Jen said, because the data, you know, it's really important to look at that data. If the data doesn't reflect what you're saying, if your actions don't match your words, your statements that are external, you know, there is no accountability there. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, that is what is starting to happen now, is that like people are calling that out. It's like, hey, you said that you were going to do this, but now a couple years later, still nothing has happened. Nothing has changed. So I think like, for me, I think like the reason allyship is so fundamental is like, if we normalize it, then we can start having even more important, harder conversations and start systematically moving the needle on these issues. If we normalize these conversations where it doesn't feel like a burden, or it doesn't feel awkward, or you don't get nervous about bringing up these issues, then we can start talking about even more important issues. So I think that for me is just like what's important is if we keep having these conversations across the millions of households in the US about Black Lives Matter, about racial equity in tech, those conversations are going to lead to something, I hope.
Yeah, and when people were concerned about, we come into July, that the conversations would die down, and the goal is to continue the momentum and keep the conversations going. Ross, going to you, because you kind of work on like the legal side of things in the workplace. What type of conversations? Because I know there's a balance, when you get into the workplace. There's a balance of, what's legal, what type of conversations can happen, and the balance of, well, it's time to get a little uncomfortable in order to be an ally. So Ross, from your perspective, like, where is that balance? Where is that line to where we can still have the uncomfortable conversations in order to elevate our voices within the workplace?
Well, I think a lot of it is employer driven. Do they create a culture where people could bring themselves to work? And I think what individuals can do to kind of expand and enhance that is to take advantage when there are months of recognition. So, Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month. These are opportunities that are really ripe for the community at large to bring conversations up, to ask your employer, hey, I know this is coming up. Is there a way that my company can help celebrate that? Can I take that on? And how can I have that conversation with colleagues? You'd be surprised how many employers would take that initiative positive and would be willing to put effort behind it. But this, brings up another important point, which is budget to this work. We also have to ask our employers and ask others, where are you spending your dollars in recognizing the opportunity that comes in diversity and inclusion? Because I always try to frame it in the context of, your employees are part of your sales team. They're part of your marketing team. They're part of the company. And if they're happy, they're going to tell others. And so how can you make your employees feel like they're integrated into the company and they want to be an advocate for the company? And what that does is increase revenue, right? So I look at diversity and inclusion as an opportunity. And it may be sitting dormant. It may not be exercised as much as it could be. But when we start recognizing the opportunity that comes in diverse communities, you're going to make that initial and increased investment, and that's going to increase, the company's opportunity, and by extension, the individual's opportunity from a diverse community to be seen as a leader that maybe they haven't been invited to participate in. So it's really about, all sorts of investing that's going to generate opportunity for everyone.
Great. No, I love that what you said. The key thing that you said was culture. I think so often that people defer to HR to kind of drive the D&I. And I think more and more now we're seeing that to set the diversity and inclusion strategy has to start from the top. From the top down, from the executive, from the CEOs, because once they have the strategy, once they develop that culture, then we can start having the conversations that are supposed to be happening, and allows people to have a better understanding of what's there. And also, you tapped into something important that was on the back of my mind when it comes to allyship, as far as the executive roles. Setting that budget, being out in the community. So if I do have a big voice, I'm upper level management, I'm an executive. You mentioned, what are the budgets that put it in place? What other things could I do in the executive role or management role, Jen, to better to better my allyship with that voice that I have?
So I would say a couple of things. One, if you're in a senior leadership position and you do have the budget, consider getting training for your employees, right? And it's not just unconscious bias training, right? That's one factor. But what people really need is a type of unconscious bias training in context to their role, so they can understand how unconscious bias shows up in the particular work that they do. So for example, sending your managers who are responsible for hiring, sending them through a training on how to make an effective selection decision, understanding how diversity impacts all of this, right? Or your recruiters making sure that they're trained before they start doing that recruiting. But another thing that you can do if you're a senior leader at a company and you have a huge platform and a huge voice is speak openly. Speak openly about where your organization is underrepresented and what increased diversity means to your company. And I challenge executive leaders with this question: do you even understand why diversity helps your organization to be more competitive? You hear a lot of leaders with the narrative of, we need diversity within our organization. It's really important. But do you really understand why and the components of it? Because the more that you truly understand and you truly grasp it, and then you start using your platform to talk about it, the more others will begin listening and saying, oh, they really do appreciate it. They really do value diversity. And then you start seeing more people coming into your organization as well too.
Yeah, that is so key, right? Because, you in the beginning, early June, you saw a lot of the CEOs, they just wanted to immediately
Oh,
put
yeah.
out a statement. And you're like,
Oh, yeah.
got to be intentional, right? And understand the voice that you have and really have an understanding of the direction you want to use your voice. I mean, that's just critical. You just want to send out just a message. Yeah, I stand up for this, but what are you standing up for? And what
Right.
action steps are you going to take? Because then it'll be someone like, you or myself that's going to step in and start holding them accountable. It's like, all right, you
Right.
said this, now what?
That's
Right.
right. Right. And that was exactly where my mind was. I would watch as CEOs would make these bold statements and bold promises that we are going to increase representation within our company. And usually it would say of Black employees, of Latinx employees, and they would talk about it. We're going to increase it by X percentage. And I'm over here thinking, okay, like I get it, and I can appreciate that you're making that statement. But do your recruiters know how to make that happen? Right? Do they know what they must start doing, stop doing, and continue doing in a very tactical manner to make this happen? Otherwise, your recruiter's going to look at you and say, I've been trying. Like, I've been trying to do this. Do you think that I haven't been trying? And then you're going to get back into that same cycle of, oh, there's nobody out there, or we've tried and here's what's happening. And it's just because, these leaders are making these statements, but they're not tying it back into, now we're going to get your team ready so that you can help to do this. Now we're going to get our hiring managers ready so you all can help to do this. Now it becomes a whole company effort.
Yeah. Awesome. As we wrap up with this, because we're just running out of time here, but I wanted to open it up to you guys for some final thoughts. Any questions that I missed or that you wanted to get over regarding allyship. So Francis, we'll start with you. Any final thoughts that you wanted to kind of share as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think the earlier conversation, when it comes to sort of executives, what I saw a lot of is that Black employees at tech companies were being asked to do kind of this extra labor that obviously wasn't paid to kind of figure out the strategy, and the statement to move forward with. And more often than not, we do have those structures in place at tech companies where we have employee resource groups for Black employees, for Latinx employees, for LGBTQIA employees, for women, and so forth. And a lot of the burden is placed on them to kind of push a lot of that strategy and recruiting strategy forward. So I do wish that there was more support there just from executives to kind of put your money where your mouth is and, invest in other folks who are being paid to do that instead of relying on your employees and giving that additional burden. They should just be focusing on their jobs. They shouldn't have to have this additional burden to kind of think about, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's great just to check in to see how they're doing. But take that check-in dialogue, and then go back to the leadership team that can actually put some things into action, right? Don't rely on those employees, and don't tokenize your employees to think that, oh yeah, now they can be our D&I people because now, because they have that understanding. We understand how to be Black, but we don't understand how to lead being Black in the workplace. That's what the diversity team and the affinity groups are really all about, right? Ross, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, let me just pick up on Francis's point, which I think is really well taken. I think we need to ask the companies to think about all of where they spend their dollars, right? So who are their vendors? Who are their consultants? Who are their attorneys? Who are their accountants? These are opportunities to get diverse allies in to understand their business and to take some of the pressure off the employees that are being asked to lead these efforts, because it might be that an employee doesn't feel comfortable sharing some of the challenges they're having at work. A consultant can help bring that to the management's attention, think and work through strategies to really help bolster those employees that need to be there, right? A consultant can come and go and can be impartial and can take confidential information and really put it to use for the benefit of the employees as well as the workplace. And so I would just urge companies to think about, how are you using your outside support to really enhance your community presence and your allyship? That investment in dollars is part of being an ally. And so I think that's a great point that Francis made.
See, now you're talking my language. Being someone who's a supplier diversity program manager for Zions Bank Corporation, that's what I'm all about. That's one of my passions, is advocating for the diverse businesses in the community to be part of a business's supply chain strategy, right? I mean, if you want to invest in the community as a big corporation, that's one of the biggest things you can do right there, is learning more about the diverse businesses, not just catering. I mean, we all love the different kinds of food, but
Right.
what diverse businesses out there can supply your furniture, your IT equipment, can property manage, can help with your merchandise, your swag, that could put your consulting, is what you said. I mean, there are so many different businesses just within Salt Lake, believe it or not, that can be part of, as part of diversity strategy. I can't imagine how many diverse businesses are there in Maryland for you, Jen, but having diverse suppliers is a huge piece of a corporation to really invest in the community and be that kind of ally there. And so just to wrap up with you, Jen, on some final thoughts as we close it out.
Yeah, so I want to reiterate something that I said earlier. And when we're talking about being an ally, I challenge you, or anyone listening to this, to not only consider what can I do as a human, right, as a person, but to really think about your role. How can I use my role and the influence and the access that is connected or tied to my role to be a better ally for specific populations. And so I really want to challenge people to begin thinking about it also in that way, and to use your role to help to support different messages and different initiatives that are happening out there for all communities.
Awesome. That's the way to close it out, is giving people a challenge. Take,
Yes.
some action steps. I love it. Well, I want to thank you, Jen, Francis, Ross, for participating in this panel. I've learned a lot from you guys as well. And what I wanted to really close out with is, just kind of sharing my perspective as well, is that when you are an ally, we're in this pandemic right now, and you see a lot of people out there, wearing their mask, when they go into the grocery store, when they can't be socially distant. That's kind of the same thing right now. When someone doesn't feel valued, respected, or heard, it's kind of like they're wearing their mask, right? And so you're only seeing half of their face, half of their potential, half of their skills. But when they have an allyship built around them that supports them, that's really trying to amplify everything about what they are and have that strong connection, you start seeing that mask start to come down. And when that mask is fully off, then you know who that person really is, their potential, their skills, and bring that all into that environment, then you can exponentially increase the productivity in your workplace. And so let's try to get the masks off, not in the pandemic sense, but in the ally sense. Keep those masks on and not in the pandemic. But when we talk about allyship, let's start removing the masks, and so we can reveal everyone's potential in the workplace as you start to create and begin to create an inclusive environment. So that's it regarding our session on allyship. I appreciate everyone for joining. I hope you benefited and sharing today. Thanks again to Ross, Francis, and Jen, and hope everybody else has the rest of a good day. Take care now.